Ever had to stand up to someone everyone else feared?
My parents looked at me with the kind of calm certainty people use when they have already decided you will swallow whatever they feed you, told me my brother was going on the cruise because he had been so stressed and he deserved it, and added that I would understand someday, and I smiled in a way that made them relax, because I have always been the one who defuses, who pays, who drives, who sends flowers, who smooths over the mess after the favorite child breaks something expensive or inconvenient. But what I did not say, because I had finally learned when silence is a shield and not a surrender, was that my version of someday had already arrived and I was done being the polite solution to other people's problems. I grew up as the reliable one and Michael grew up as the almost there hero, the one who nearly finished school, who almost kept a job, who wanted to launch a project and needed a tiny bridge, who just had a tough week and could not cover the car insurance. And every time my mother sighed and said he was trying and my father said family steps up, I stepped up because I was told that is what love looks like. So I learned the dull, practical parts of love, the parts with bank passwords and payment reminders and credit limits, and I swallowed the pretty parts for later, told myself that later would be mine, and then they gave him the cruise and told me I would understand. And something in me that had been patient for too many years stopped being patient in an instant. The funny thing is that favoritism ages like milk, not wine, and by the time you hit your 30s and 40s the pattern is no longer a quirk in a family story, but the weather you live under every single day. So when holidays came, Michael's gifts were always memorable and mine were helpful, his a show and mine a service, his a framed photo and mine the paid dental bill, his a speech and mine the rent caught up before the landlord called again, and I told myself that someone has to be the adult, someone has to hold the rope while the others swing on it, and I wore that like a badge right up until my mother said he deserved the cruise because he had been under pressure and I, apparently, had not. I do not cry much, not because I am tough, but because I learned to move while the feeling is still hot, and that evening I opened my laptop and pulled up a simple folder I have kept for years and never talked about. A quiet ledger that started as a way to remember what I had loaned out and what I had covered and what I had said yes to when I should have said not today, and as I scrolled past the utilities I put on my card to keep their lights on, past the cell phone plan I had kept on the family bundle because it was easier, past the co-signed credit line I had secured when Michael wanted that second chance for the third time, I felt the kind of steady anger that does not explode, it concentrates, and I thought, if you are going to treat me like an automatic teller machine, then let us at least acknowledge there is a balance and there are terms. I remembered every small moment they forgot to count, like when my father told the table that Michael had negotiated the hospital bill down because he is good with people, while I just smiled and passed the potatoes because you do not correct your father at dinner even when it was you who made the calls and you who sat on hold and you who paid what remained. And I remembered the family group chat where my mother sent a picture of a cake she said Michael bought for her birthday, while I looked at the charge in my banking app and decided there are hills not worth dying on, and I realized I had built them a comfort they had mistaken for entitlement, and I had done it so quietly that they did not even hear the sound of my spine bending. When my mother said you will understand someday, she meant that someday I would wake up and see the world the way they do, where a son is a legacy and a daughter is an auxiliary generator, where love is a ladder and my rung is there to be stepped on so someone else can reach a nice view. But my someday was different, because my someday meant I would stop performing the version of daughter that makes everyone comfortable and start acting like the adult I have actually been all along, and that started with admitting a simple truth I had dodged for years, which is that being needed is not the same as being loved, and being generous is not the same as being respected. So I told them I was happy for Michael, that the cruise would be good for him, that I hoped they would make memories, and I let my voice sound normal because you do not announce a boundary, you set it and you live it. And while they packed and sent me little updates about excursions and shows they wanted to book, I was doing my own booking, not for a trip but for a clean exit, and I am not talking about drama, I am talking about control, the kind you quietly reclaim by listing every auto payment I carried for them and preparing the notifications I would send. Not a tantrum in words, but a recalibration in actions. I know some people will say I should have confronted them right there, should have made a scene, should have demanded fairness. But I have been making small speeches my whole life, and none of those speeches ever beat the warm glow of their belief that the golden child will get there any minute now and the steady child will handle it until then. So I chose a different language, the language of receipts. The language of cancellations and transfers and permissions revoked, and it made me almost giddy to realize that I did not need anybody's permission to stop funding my own erasure. They left for the cruise with hugs and that smug little comfort people wear when they think they have taught you a lesson in patience, and I waved and smiled and told them to send photos, then went home and opened the ledger again and picked one small line item to start the process. Not because it was the biggest or the most symbolic, but because it was the one I had allowed to live longest without question, the family streaming plan that sat on my card while everyone pretended it belonged to the house, and I removed every extra profile, reset the password, and moved the billing to a new email that only I control, and when the text pings started coming in from a confused brother asking why his shows would not load, I put my phone face down and let the silence answer, because a little taste of life without my constant yes felt like the right appetizer. By the time their ship left the harbor, I had already started the audit of my life and of theirs, and while they clinked glasses under cruise ship lights believing they were drifting toward a future where I would keep doing what I always did, I was building a future where every single thing I carried would either be acknowledged, repaid, or released, and when they returned, they would call it sudden and cruel and unnecessary, but I would call it accurate, overdue, and non-negotiable, and if you are wondering whether I plan to go easy for the sake of peace, let me answer with this. The first switch I flipped tonight was tiny on purpose, because I wanted them to feel a harmless pinch before they felt the hand that had been holding them up let go. They left with the kind of cheerful confidence people wear when they believe the world will pause for their happiness and resume once they are ready to be important again. And while my mother texted a picture of a boarding pass and my father sent one of those corny messages about sunsets and gratitude that he copies from his friends, I answered with a simple heart because there was nothing to argue about anymore, and because I had already shifted from needing them to notice me to needing them to stop leaning on me, which meant that every small thread I had tied to hold the family together was about to be cut with steady hands and a clear mind. And if that sounds cold, then you have not spent years being thanked as if you were a delivery service instead of a daughter who learned to solve problems faster than other people can admit they caused them. On the morning the ship pulled away, I made coffee and opened the ledger again, not with rage, but with the tidy focus you use when you finally decide that your life is not a charity and your time is not a public utility. Then I worked line by line through things that used to look like kindness, but were really a permanent loan no one intended to repay. Starting with the property tax cushion I had kept in a sub-account under my name because my parents never liked the way envelopes looked on the counter, moving those funds into a new account with a new bank and a new login because I am done mistaking my organization for their responsibility. And while I was at it, I called the hospital billing office and removed myself as the guarantor on my father's lingering balance, since the date of service had long passed and the monthly plan had been serviced primarily by me. Explained that any future correspondence should go directly to him, and felt that rare quiet sensation when a boundary becomes a fact rather than a request. The next file in the stack was the family cell plan, a monster I had fed for years because it seemed easier to keep everyone under one umbrella than to argue about late fees and data overages. And I laughed at the way carriers use the word family to disguise the reality that one person pays and everyone else acts surprised when limits exist, so I ported my number to a separate account with a new PIN and a fresh security question. Scheduled the other lines to terminate the morning they landed so that my action would be clean and traceable rather than petty and chaotic, and I left a plain note in the draft folder of my email with the account change confirmation, because I do not hide what I am not ashamed of. I simply stopped performing it for people who confuse my reliability with an obligation that has no end date. After lunch, I opened the insurance portal and removed my card as the automatic payer for the car my brother drives that is technically in my parents' name, documented the change, and sent the carrier a written notice that all billing must go to the named owners from this day forward. And while the screen spun, I thought about the time my father bragged to his friends that Michael had negotiated a better rate by being charming at the office. which was funny because the charming thing had been me. Doing math in a waiting room and calling back until I got a person with authority, a memory that once stung and now felt like a reminder that I had been underwriting a story that did not have my name in it. So I closed that chapter by setting a calendar reminder for myself that simply said no more silent subsidies, a phrase that felt like oxygen. Because I have learned that dignity without documentation can be rewritten by whoever talks loudest, I printed a clean, simple packet that listed every payment I had made in the last few years with dates and amounts and confirmation numbers. Not to wave in their faces during a fight, but to end the argument before it starts, and I placed it in a sealed envelope addressed to both of them with a short note that said, "This is a receipt for the version of daughter you preferred. This version is discontinued," and I tucked the envelope in a safe place that only I can reach, not because I owe them a presentation, but because I owe myself clarity when memory gets sentimental and tries to drag me back. As the days went by and the ship tossed them soft entertainment, I kept doing the kind of quiet work that doesn't make a good family story, yet changes the story for good. Closing out the streaming services that had become background noise to everyone else and a monthly bill to me, canceling the lawn service I had set up when my father threw his back out and never bothered to cancel when he healed, transferring the internet account back to the address where it belongs and scheduling the equipment return so the charges would not roll into collections with my name on them, and with each confirmation email, I felt less like a villain and more like a person who finally noticed that the ground she stands on is hers to keep or give away. And I chose to keep it. I know exactly how this will be told in the living room when they return, that the version will be I changed while they were away, as if a week at sea can warp an entire personality. So to keep my part honest, I wrote myself a private statement in my notes app where I said I did not change. I stopped pretending that unequal love is love at all, and I stopped paying rent on a role I did not audition for. And seeing the words in my own hand made me feel steadier than any speech, because speeches are for audiences and this choice is for me. And because a good counter move does not rely on explanations but on timing, I set the last piece for the hour their flight would land. A clean cut that would be felt rather than argued about. And when I pressed confirm on the termination of the remaining lines and the final autopays with a note to the bank that no charges from those merchants are authorized going forward, I watched the little wheels spin and thought about how many times I watched them spin while advocating for everyone but myself, then closed the laptop and exhaled in a way that felt like stepping out of a costume, because the next call they try to make to me will tell them everything they need to know about the new terms. And the first voicemail they cannot leave will be the moment they begin to understand that someday has finally arrived for me, and it does not include being reachable on demand. I spent the first full day of their trip not arguing with ghosts or replaying speeches I would never give, but building the kind of clean plan you make when you finally accept that fairness is not coming and that the only person who can stop the slow leak in your life is the person holding the bucket. So I started by taking back my name in all the places where I had quietly parked it for their convenience, opening a new bank account at a different institution with a fresh login, moving my payroll there, changing the security questions to answers only I would ever know, and then I went through every card and account where I had let them be authorized users because it was easier at the time, removed the authorizations without ceremony, requested new cards, changed online credentials, and froze my credit so that no future emergency could be solved with a loan invented out of my peace of mind. I updated everything at work because I know how families respond when the gravy train misses a stop, gave human resources a new emergency contact who actually treats me like a person and not a backup battery, changed my mailing address to a box where I am the only key holder, redirected my health accounts and my retirement items so that statements would not show up at a house where my generosity had been treated like oxygen, and while each confirmation came in, I added it to the folder labeled with a simple word that felt more honest than anything we had said to each other in years, because calling my exit a plan made it sound sneaky when it was actually a correction. I called the utility companies and scheduled final reads for every service I had set up and paid for in their names, asked that the deposits be returned to the card that funded them, clarified that any service continuing past the read would require a new responsible party, and I did it with the calm of someone refusing to be baited. Because the customer service scripts always ask if you want to leave a contact number for whoever is taking over, and I said no, they know how to reach each other. And the stillness that followed those words felt like the first honest minute I had had with any of these companies since the day I let the word family make me careless. Because money has a way of hiding in corners, I swept the corners too, closed the travel rewards accounts that everyone had treated like a communal jar even though every mile had come from my long workdays and my late flights. Turned the points into a one-way ticket that will probably look dramatic when they piece it together, cashed out the little app balances that no one notices until they are gone, and made a simple worksheet of what had been collected back so that if my resolve ever weakens, I can see in black and white the cost of continuing to pretend this was love rather than reliance dressed up as tradition. I knew the part that would bother them was not the services or the points. It would be the accounts we had called joint, because that word sounds like together even when together is a story told over dinner. So I pulled copies of the agreements and reminded myself that my name on a line is not a romance, it is a right. Then I moved my deposits out of the household savings I had built with my pay while they treated it like weather that simply appears. Left the minimum required to keep the account open so the bank would not freeze anything while they were mid-ocean, and scheduled the final transfer for the afternoon their plane touched down because endings should be visible if you want them to be understood, and I wanted this understood. I found a short-term apartment on a quiet lease that does not ask many questions and does not come with people rifling through my groceries. Paid for it with the card they do not have numbers for. Bought a simple prepaid phone that only a few people will get. Set up a private email that does not feed into any family threads, and packed without drama because I am not staging a show. I am ending a job I never applied for, and I labeled each box in a way that will make sense to me when I unpack in a place where my name is not a tool but a person. There is a version of this where I leave them a long letter and a final plea to see me as more than the helper who shows up when the bill is due, and there is also the version where I torch the bridge and call it healing, but I chose something flatter and harder. I chose receipts. I chose clean dates and logged calls and accounts that now read closed by owner. I chose a simple message scheduled to deliver on their landing day that says I will not be funding the role you wrote for me any longer. That all services and supports have been terminated, that any balance remaining belongs to the people it was always supposed to belong to, and that if anyone needs records, they may request them like adults rather than demanding them like royalty. Which is not a flourish even if it sounds like one, it is a boundary in plain language. I am aware that some people will take their side because a daughter leaving without a speech is easier to label than parents who treat their steady child like a bank, and I am prepared for the group chat to light up with big opinions and small facts. But I am also prepared for the silence I have chosen, because there is a relief in not explaining what you no longer offer, and there is a relief in seeing that the balance I carried for years can return to zero without anyone's permission, and if you are wondering whether I felt a twist of guilt when I pressed the last confirmation, I will tell you that I felt a twist of something else, the kind of steady courage that arrives when you stop buying your way into a room that will never save you a seat. And I smiled not because I won anything yet, but because the last transfer is set to move the afternoon they come home, and when their ride from the airport reaches a house that looks the same yet no longer runs on me, they will walk straight into the proof that my someday has already happened, and the next sound they hear will not be my voice, it will be the quiet of an account that finally stopped answering. They landed on a late afternoon that pretends to be gentle but never is, texted me from the gate with the kind of chipper exhaustion people perform when they expect a warm pickup and a warmer dinner. And while their messages stacked on the locked screen of the phone I now use only for work, the clock rolled over to the exact minute I had chosen weeks earlier, which is when the last auto payments dissolved, the remaining shared balances shifted, the scheduled transfers cleared, the useless lines terminated, and the account notes I had placed like small, patient markers turned into facts that could not be debated because a bank notification does not argue, it simply informs. So that by the time they reached baggage claim, the money I had quietly parked under their comfort, and my name was already standing where it belonged, with me, not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I was done paying for the privilege of being ignored. They tried to call, and the call failed, They tried again, and the failure repeated. They tried leaving a voicemail, and there was nowhere to leave it. They tried the group chat, because that is where family wars are usually fought now. And what came back to them was a clean silence that did not beg or accuse or explain. It simply made space for whatever story they wanted to tell about me. And while they were still blaming the airport network and the airline's messy Wi-Fi, the very normal systems I had put in place kept unfolding, so that the ride home was paid with a card I have never shared. The key they used opened a door to a house that felt the same, and yet not at all the same. Because the lights still turned on even though the electricity account no longer sat in my hands, and the internet equipment blinked while the service portal bluntly demanded a new owner. And the streaming apps greeted them with the cheerful friendliness those platforms project when they are requesting payment, which is to say they were greeted as adults rather than dependents. On the kitchen counter was exactly nothing because I chose not to leave a dramatic envelope or a framed lecture or a stack of highlighted receipts, yet their inboxes held a single email delivered at the timestamp I had promised only myself. A message with a simple subject that said records, a short paragraph that said support has ended and all services have been returned to the people they belong to, a password-protected attachment containing the ledger they never knew existed, the dates, the amounts, the confirmation numbers, the note that every recoverable dollar had been recovered, that all future expenses belonged to the person incurring them, and that I would not be discussing it by phone or text because my boundary is not a negotiation. It is a schedule, and the schedule has already run. Michael, who loves an audience and hates an invoice, reacted first because of course he did, calling our mother from his car with that pleading tone that always won him dessert and even bigger rescues, and he discovered that his phone line now belongs to him. His insurance notices now reach him directly. His gas card no longer authorizes because it was always mine. His entertainment does not load because I am no longer footing the bill for his downtime. And while he performed the usual outrage about family and loyalty, my mother began the dance I have watched for years, the minimizing, the she is just emotional, the give her a day and she will come around, except that there was no number to call, no door to knock on, and no emergency that could be solved by making me feel guilty enough to reattach myself. My father did what he always does. He looked for the administrative angle, he opened the family folder, he checked account names, he tried to find the hole through which I had slipped, and he found instead that I had not slipped through anything. I had walked out the front door they built for me years ago when they decided I was the worker bee who would always return, and I left the door open behind me so they could see there is no trap and no trick. There is only the reality that if you treat someone as infrastructure long enough, one day the power company turns off service and asks the users to open their own account. Because I know how quickly memory rewrites, I included in that attachment a plain statement that said I do not require repayment for the past years because I am not interested in relitigating decades of choices, that the dollars I reclaimed were strictly those tied to my name, my deposits, my points, my cushions, and my credits, that any debts you owe to other parties are yours to manage, and that the only condition attached to my exit is the one condition I have never successfully asked for, which is to be left alone unless the conversation we have is one where the words equal and accountable appear without being forced, which is not an ultimatum. It is a clarity I should have said out loud a long time ago. What they felt in that moment is none of my business, but what I felt as the last confirmation email slid into my private inbox was not triumph in the melodramatic sense. It was the clean relief that comes from putting a heavy thing down and refusing to pick it up again, a feeling I had mistaken for cruelty in other people because I had been trained to think love equals carrying, when sometimes love equals letting go of the performance and letting the other players learn their own lines, and in that quiet I finally understood that the point of this was never to make them suffer. It was to stop suffering the way I always had, and to make sure that the next time someone wanted a cruise or a cushion or a rescue, they would have to look in the mirror first. If you are asking what the last move was, the one that made this irreversible, it was not a dramatic reveal or a public post or a drive-by confrontation. It was a simple scheduled notice from the bank that hit their inbox at midnight stating that the household savings account now holds the bank's minimum because the funds attributed to my deposits have been transferred to the new account in my name, complete with the transaction history that shows exactly how much of their safety net was not theirs, and the line at the end that reads closed by owner in relation to the co-signed credit line they once waved around like a family heirloom, which means that when morning comes and the angry calls turn into the quieter logistics, they will finally see that I did not vanish out of spite, but out of math, and the only path to me now runs through a sentence they have never said and might never say, a sentence that begins with "we were wrong" and ends with "we are ready to change," and until those words appear, my silence will keep doing what their love never did, which is protect me. In the first week after they came home, the calls and texts and secondhand messages arrived in a little storm that would have felt familiar if I had not already decided that familiarity is not the same as love. With my aunt writing that my mother was worried sick and my cousin forwarding a screenshot of Michael's dramatic post about betrayal and modern selfishness and the death of family values. And buried under all of that noise was the simple thing I had spent years asking for and never receiving, which was a clear acknowledgement of what I had carried and a willingness to carry it themselves going forward. So I did not respond with a speech or a counter post or a damning thread of receipts. I responded with nothing at all because the work was already finished, and explanations can sometimes give people the idea that the door is still unlocked. A few days later, my father sent a message that was almost kind if you do not look too closely, asking for a meeting to clear the air and offering me a chance to return to the family if I would just abandon whatever I was doing. And there was a time when that wording would have made me second-guess my posture, but I had built myself a posture that did not lean, so I sent a short, plain reply from the new address that said, "I am not returning to the role you wrote for me, and I am not discussing the ledger, that I wish them well, that I will answer only in writing for matters that require signatures or a transfer of titles, and that any conversation about repair begins with the sentence that they do not say, which is that they made a choice and that the choice had a cost." And when his answer came back in the familiar tone of wounded authority, I put the phone down and took a walk around my block, not to calm down, but to enjoy the feeling of a life where my time belongs to me. Because I know the pattern, I prepared for the next move, which always involves a sudden emergency meant to pull me back into the harness. And right on schedule, a neighbor I barely know called to tell me my mother had stopped by my old place in tears and left a note on the door asking for help with a bill she said was urgent, and it would have been so easy to step back into the script. Yet I had already put in place the phone tree and the spreadsheet and the folder that say very calmly that I do not fund urgency anymore, so I scanned the note, filed it under "not mine," and returned to the list that has become my favorite habit, a list of things that belong to me and to no one else. Like quiet mornings and bills with only my name on them, and meals I do not eat standing up because someone else needs something that is somehow always free for them and expensive for me. There was a last move left, and I had saved it because I wanted the ending to say out loud the thing I had been trying to say with my wallet for years, which is that generosity without respect becomes a trap. So I took the community scholarship I had been funding under a soft family label, and I changed the name on the paperwork, and I widened the eligibility to women who have been the helpers for too long and are ready to finish a degree or a certification or a training they keep postponing because they are paying for other people's second chances. And I sent one letter to my parents with a copy of the announcement and a note that said the support you enjoyed on autopilot will not end in bitterness. It will end as opportunity for people who will not mistake it for an entitlement. And while I did not write a single unkind sentence, the message was loud enough to reach exactly where it needed to reach. Because sometimes the most elegant revenge is not destruction, it is redirection. With a spine. In the quiet that followed, which did not feel like loneliness so much as clarity, I set up the final protections that make a boundary real instead of inspirational, updated my will to reflect a life that does not reward people for ignoring me, moved my emergency contact to a friend who shows up without a ledger, and scheduled a single future reminder for myself with the line, "Do not romanticize unpaid labor," and I smiled at how simple and unpoetic that looks on a screen and how deeply it cuts. through the fog that used to rise when they said family with that tone that makes you forget the invoice in your hand. They have adjusted the story in the way people do when the truth inconveniences them, and I am sure in some living rooms I am now the cold daughter who walked away after a vacation. Though in the places where the math is written down, I am the adult who finally told the truth about weight and balance and cost. And here is the part one will tell you because it matters more than the gossip, which is that I sleep without that dull fear of a late notice meant for someone else, and I wake up without bracing for the next chore dressed as love, and in that calm I can finally admit something I did not let myself say when I was still trying to earn my chair at their table, that I wanted them to choose me once without being prompted, and when they did not, I chose myself with a precision that cannot be undone. If they ever come to me with the words I asked for and the actions that prove those words grew into something sturdier than regret, I will listen, because I do not get any joy from permanent exile. But I will not trade the life I have built for the fantasy that my silence will be enough to teach them what the cruise, the ledger, and the empty family plan already made obvious, and until that day arrives, my revenge stands exactly as I intended it to stand. Not as a wound I carry around, but as a structure I built from the bricks of every little slight, and every cheerful assumption, and every quiet payment, a structure that holds me up without asking for applause. And if you are waiting for the dramatic twist where I cave and sprint back to fix the scene, I am going to disappoint you in the most satisfying way, because the twist already happened when I learned that the most explosive payback in a family like mine is not fire or scandal. It is the clean, relentless permanence of a know that never raises its voice and never changes its mind.